The Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch was created in between 1490 and 1510. Living at the threshold of the 16th century, Bosch had a kind of liberty in his works, in the liminal space between no longer medieval, but also not quite modern. Surprisingly, little is known about Bosch's life, although he was born into a family of established craftsmen in Den Bosch, where he created his name. However, his paintings became extremely popular almost immediately after creation, with many notable figures owning his art. The two main influences in the Garden of Earthly Delights were the Bible, but also other medieval manuscripts, which had similar playful symbols of gargoyles and animals drawn into margins and scrawled on the edges, as can be seen in the garden too. Bosch also used oil paints on oak panels for his works, creating a bright and vibrant array of colours, with works characterised by a fairly sketchy style. Whilst the brushstrokes may appear smooth, if you look carefully you can even see their quick, playful and lively applications, showing Bosch's distinct method of painting. The painting is now believed to have been commissioned by Engelbert of Nassau, thus not used as an altarpiece in a church, but rather for private edification and pleasure. Since 1939, however, the painting has been housed in the Museo del Prado in Madrid, with a large, commanding presence, nearly 4 meters wide and 2 meters tall. Although today's seen open, triptychs traditionally would remain closed for most occasions, such as this monochrome outer panel of the world in grisaille. The biblical third day of creation is shown, where land has been separated from water and vegetation has begun to grow. Others have interpreted it to be a representation of the aftermath of the flood, with a spherical orb half filled with water. Both clearly show the interesting world, untouched by humans and animals, and thus possessing a form of surreal and unnatural stillness. God is shown in the upper clouds of the left-hand corner, seemingly dwarfed by the magnitude of his creation, and subtly blending into the grey background. Coupled with the fragile elderly appearance and a whimsically long beard, one could see this depiction of God in an almost humorous and comic light, as he watches over his disproportionately large world. And then there's the surprise when the triptych is opened, filled with scrupulous detail and an array of luscious colours and movement. A late Gothic palette is used, with expensive pigments such as vermilion and ivory. Triptychs are typically read chronologically, from left to right, so we'll start with the left panel. The centre shows one of the most famous Genesis stories, the creation of Eve from one of Adam's ribs. Here, Adam, Eve, and even God are shown as just as important as all the other creatures in the garden, created on the same lifelike scale. And God seems like a material figure rather than a divine presence, shown by his youthful and human-like complexion, which shows him almost similarly to Jesus. A large, almost fountain-like, coral-coloured tower seems to be another dominant feature within the panel, made up of elements from different plants, such as cacti and lily pads. Its almost phallic shape, with playful and erotic connotations, again shows the strangely sexual environment for the creation of the first humans. The animals here also seem to become more and more exotic, with strange hybrid creatures making references to portmanteaus such as peacocks and spoonbills. The right panel depicts the ravaging and despairing hellish pits, a clear and stark sight, and perhaps also a warning for medieval viewers. In the background, set in the dark, beams of torchlight frame a burning city, and buildings are engulfed in the flames, showing the destruction of an orderly society, perhaps even inspired by the fire within Bosch's own home city. Surrealist ideas seem to be heavily present in this panel, with animals punishing humans who have succumbed to corruption, such as birds gorging on a terrified man. In a sense, this panel is the most straightforward of the three, displaying the infamous biblically corroborated story of hell. Unlike previously, here there seems to be a clear divide between humans and animals, although surprisingly it is the animals who are the ones punishing, with the humans seen as inferior and in despair. I think I feel most intrigued about the central panel, a first impression of a seemingly enchanting vista, filled with exaggerated animals, oversized luscious fruit, and also an abundance of nude figures. The earliest surviving description of this panel by Siguenza described the artwork as the strawberry panel due to the dominant nature of such fruits. Here, the otherworldly and supremely vivid drawings allude to the fleeting nature of physical pleasure and convey a key theme of excess and abundance with the over-the-top large amounts. And then, of course, there is the so-called playground of corruption and shenanigans that occur in the garden, with the location itself being associated with the courting of lovers for centuries. Some assume the dancing nude figures were inspired by the heretical sect of the Adamite cult, who believed in free love and were nude during religious services. The unclothed humans also seem to reveal further sins, showing humans at their most primal and vulnerable, without any material focus. This depiction of humans as a natural creature, knowing no civilization, later led to the idea of the noble savage in literature. The virtually identical figures in the panel, not possessing individual identities or features, show the lack of hierarchy and just the natural world. Humans and animals are mixed together in a jumbled sprawl of matter, and there's a wildly playful and sexual aspect, suggesting the natural progression of sin from one to many. The scene also contains no focal point or linear narrative, with seemingly different stories in little groups of details, enhancing the absence of God and showing the complete freedom of humankind now. You may also notice that all the figures in the panel appear to be adults, and there are no children, showing how they don't fulfill God's injunction to the first couple to be fruitful and multiply, but rather a perversion to sexual desires for lust. And then there is the playful masquerade of men on horseback riding around a pool composed only of women. Is this the first segregation of sexes in the piece? Probably. And here we see the women in an almost objectified state, as a prize or reward to be won by the circle of men. But other than this, the rest of the humans seem to be almost ungendered, with more similarities than things dividing them, significant in showing the unimportant role of gender and lust. I guess when looking at this painting, one of the questions you may have is what it actually represents, a paradise or a false paradise? There are those who see it as the utopia of a new world, an imagined place where the first humans hadn't been expelled from Eden. Hans Belting looked into the idea of how utopia was first coined by Sir Thomas More, showing a vision of perfect humanity. Could this garden be representative of Bosch's dreams and desires for a world, a benchmark for how the world should be? Hans Belting believes Bosch's paradise does not lie in the long-lost age, but beyond the bounds of time itself. This belief of innocence may come from the seeming lack of evidence of suffering, pain, and aging within the painting, as an almost imagined and dreamlike fantasy, and everyone in a state of all-consuming sexual love. Or you may see this as a false paradise, a world where humans have given in to lust and sin, a depiction of lovers of pleasure now rather than lovers of God. This can be seen through elements such as the fountain at the centre of the panel, which, whilst mirroring the fountain in Eden, is cracked, showing the lack of perfection and evil now present. A kind of emptiness can also be seen in the panel, shown through carcasses, empty shells, and cracked eggs, disrupting nature's harmony. Fish can be seen carried by men out of their normal habitat, and further alluding to chaos. But if this is true, why would Bosch paint such an unsavoury sin as lust in such visually enchanting and attractive colours? Probably because medieval men were taught that sin presented itself in lavish disguises, with beauty often lurking on the surface above damnation. Others have completely strayed from trying to understand its meaning, arguing that the painting will always be too complex and ambiguous to fully grasp. Falkenberg asserted that Bosch's peers must have been as bewildered and fascinated as we are nowadays, so maybe the function of the painting was to start a conversation and not to stop it. Whilst this view may seem like a cop-out, it may actually be the most reasonable. The garden is neither the polar utopia or dystopia that so many art critics have claimed it to be. I think that my view, whilst retaining some of the elements of romantic and idealised love, is closer to a dystopian world. Whilst erotic pleasure is clearly evident, it seems to be an almost deceiving mask for the chaos and falseness shown through the oblivious nature of the sinners. Philosopher Thomas Hobbes argues that freedom is good but security is better, and without control of authorities, the world would be a hostile, poor and desolate place. And I think this relates to the panel. There seems to be no hierarchy or authority present, with all the figures doing as they please and enjoying full liberty and freedom. This gives a sense of the almost imminent lack of security and conflict. Surely the figures will not be in a state of supreme joy forever. Thus, it is almost as though this central panel presents the figures cautiously balanced on the edge of heaven and hell, or the edge of peace and conflict. That is for the viewer to decide. Three main other copies of the work were made after Bosch's death in the 16th century, one located in the Wellcome Collection in London and the other two in Paris and Budapest. Seeing this art in the Wellcome Collection is what inspired me to choose it for my project, taking me back to my 10-year-old fascination of the work, just so completely unlike any other Renaissance piece. Although the copy is not even comparable to the bright lusciousness of the original, it does allow viewers to experience the magical confusion that is Bosch's work.
I like old people. I like a dinosaur. I like a house. That one thing is a ball.
Is it a ball?
A big ball pink.
And finally, there is significance in acknowledging the undoubtedly huge and wide-ranging effect of the work on society today, acting as a springboard for many surrealist artists such as Dali. You can also see its tangible effect through the modern reproductions of the painting, as well as swimsuits and even child picture books, showing the almost universally magical and fantastical effect that this painting has on viewers. Overall, while my presentation has by no means even scratched the surface of this amazing painting, I hope that it has inspired you to view this masterpiece for yourselves, nearby in the Wellcome Collection or even further afield in Madrid, a work that truly tests the boundaries of religion in art.